I thought I was just visiting an old friend, but his mother, she ended up teaching me more about love, patience, and silence than anyone my age ever could. I hadn't planned on staying long that afternoon. It was just supposed to be a quick stop, a familiar street, an old gate, and a polite knock on a door I'd known since I was a kid. My friend wasn't home, but the one who opened the door made the air shift in an instant. It was her, his mother, Clara. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. Time had softened her edges but deepened her grace. She wasn't the same woman who used to scold us for muddy shoes or late dinners. There was a stillness in her now, the kind that comes with years, with life. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands catching the light as she smiled. "Look at you," she said, her voice half a laugh. "You grew up on me." It was such a simple thing to say, but it landed in a quiet place inside me. Maybe it was her tone, that mix of affection and disbelief, or maybe it was how her eyes lingered a heartbeat longer than before. She stepped aside and waved me in. The house smelled like lemon soap and brewed tea, just like it used to. Every sound echoed faintly, like the walls remembered old summers and laughter. I could almost hear my younger self racing down the hallway. Clara led me to the sitting room. She moved with an easy confidence, every gesture unhurried, deliberate. The afternoon sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting soft gold over the room, over her. "I'm sorry he's not home," she said, setting a teapot on the table. "He's always off somewhere lately. You men grow up and forget your mothers." Her words were light, teasing, but there was something beneath them, a touch of loneliness maybe, a sigh she never let finish. As she poured the tea, her hand brushed mine, only for a second, but long enough for me to notice the warmth of her skin. She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did I. There was no intention behind it, just a quiet familiarity that suddenly felt different. We sat across from each other. She asked about work, about life in the city, about whether I still painted like I used to. I answered, trying not to stare at the curve of her smile or how the light caught the side of her face. At one point, she laughed at something I said, a low, warm laugh that filled the room. I realized I was smiling, not because of the joke, but because of her. That was when it hit me. The air between us wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't just nostalgia or politeness, it was awareness. Subtle, unspoken, but real. And as I left that day, with her voice calling, "Come by again sometime," I already knew I would. Not for my friend. But for the woman who somehow made the past and present blend into something dangerously close to beautiful. I hadn't planned to stop by again so soon, but something about the quiet way she'd said, "Come by again sometime," stayed with me. It echoed in my head while I was driving through town, while I sat alone at the small cafe near the station. By evening, I found myself standing at her door again, pretending it was just coincidence. She opened it with the same soft smile, the kind that made the edges of a long day fade away. "Back already?" she teased, leaning on the doorway, arms crossed. I was nearby, I lied, though we both knew I wasn't. She only smiled wider, stepping aside to let me in. This time, the air between us felt easier, or maybe we were both pretending it was. The living room was bathed in the fading orange of dusk. A gentle breeze moved the curtains, carrying the scent of her jasmine candles. She motioned for me to sit, and soon we were talking, about nothing and everything. It started with simple things, how small the town felt now, how fast time had passed. Then we drifted into memories, the pranks I'd pulled with her son, the times she'd scolded us both for muddy footprints or broken glasses. She laughed, shaking her head. "You were always the quiet one," she said. "But you had that look, the one that said you were thinking too much for your own good." I smiled. "You noticed?" "I notice more than people think." Her tone was light, but her eyes stayed on me a little too long. It was strange, how familiar everything felt, yet entirely new. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. There was a warmth in her now that wasn't just maternal, it was human, real, layered with years and quiet strength. She poured tea again, her fingers brushing the cup to steady it. When she handed it to me, her touch grazed mine, just long enough to make my pulse skip. She must have felt it too, because her lips curved in that knowing, amused way. "Still shy?" she asked softly. I looked at her, half smiling. "Depends who's asking." Her laugh, quiet, genuine, filled the space like music. She leaned back, curling her legs beneath her on the sofa, utterly at ease. I watched her speak, noticing things I hadn't before, the way her voice softened at the end of a sentence, the faint dimple that appeared when she smiled, the confidence of someone who no longer needed to impress anyone. Time slipped away unnoticed. The shadows lengthened, the tea grew cold, but neither of us moved to end the conversation. By the time I stood to leave, it was dark outside. She walked me to the door, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "Next time," she said, "you're staying for dinner." And the way she said it, not a question, not a tease, but something quietly certain, made me realize there would be a next time. She wasn't kidding about dinner. 2 days later, I got a short message from her son, "Mom said you should come by tonight. She's cooking too much again." I smiled at my phone longer than I should have. There was no real reason to say yes, and yet, there I was that evening, standing at her door again, a small box of chocolates in hand, pretending it was a polite gesture, when really, it was an excuse to see her smile again. Clara greeted me in the doorway, apron tied loosely around her waist, a strand of hair escaping and brushing against her cheek. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said, though the warmth in her voice told me she liked that I did. The kitchen was alive with quiet rhythm, the sizzle of olive oil, the soft clink of utensils, the faint hum of an old song playing from her phone. She handed me a knife and said, "If you're staying for dinner, you're helping." So I did. We stood side by side at the counter, chopping vegetables, passing ingredients, brushing shoulders occasionally, small, innocent touches that seemed to hum with awareness neither of us mentioned. Her conversation drifted between light and personal, memories of her teaching job, her son's travels, little things about how she fills her evenings now that the house is mostly quiet. She didn't complain, but I could hear the faint edge of loneliness beneath her calm tone. "You ever notice," she said softly, "how quiet can feel louder when you're alone?" I looked up. "Yeah. I do." Our eyes met. For a moment, it wasn't small talk anymore. It was truth, shared, simple, and strangely intimate. We ate together at the kitchen table. The light above us was warm and soft. The food was good, but it was her laughter, sudden and unguarded, that made the evening memorable. She teased me about city habits, about how I still overthink before speaking. "You're too careful," she said, tilting her head, studying me. "It's sweet, but, you can relax, you know." "I'm relaxed," I said, smiling. She hummed, clearly unconvinced. "Maybe I should teach you how." It was playful, harmless, and yet, the words lingered, leaving a quiet spark in the air. When dinner ended, I helped her clean up. She tried to wave me off, but I insisted. Our hands met again at the sink, both reaching for the same dish. This time, neither of us pulled away right away. Her hand was warm, steady. She looked up, and for a second, it felt like time paused between us, the steady hum of the fridge, the faint sound of the night outside, and the weight of something unspoken hanging between our eyes. Then she smiled, that same teasing smile, and said, "You really have grown up." And I realized, for the first time, that I wasn't sure which one of us she was trying to convince. Dinner became a quiet ritual after that night. I'd stop by once or twice a week, always pretending it was casual, that it was just about catching up, sharing stories, keeping company. But each visit blurred the lines a little more. That evening, the air felt different from the moment I stepped inside. She was sitting on the couch when I arrived, no apron, no hurried motion in the kitchen. Just her, dressed simply but beautifully, reading a book under the warm glow of a lamp. "I thought we were cooking again," I said, closing the door softly behind me. She smiled without looking up. "Not tonight. I already made pasta. I thought maybe we could just sit." There was something in her voice, softer than usual, maybe even uncertain. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. The faint sound of rain tapped against the windows, filling the pauses between words. We ate quietly at first. Conversation came slower, as if both of us were too aware of what we weren't saying. When she laughed, I caught myself staring longer than I should have. She noticed. "What?" she asked, her smile playful but her eyes questioning. "Nothing. You just seem different tonight." "Different how?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Calmer. Or maybe I'm just noticing you more." For a second, her expression softened, surprise, maybe even vulnerability, before she masked it with that teasing smirk again. "I should be flattered," she said lightly, "that someone your age still notices." I opened my mouth to respond, but she leaned forward, eyes narrowing just slightly, the teasing in her tone deepening. "You know," she said, voice low, "I could teach you things girls your age don't even know." The words weren't loud, but they seemed to stop the whole room. I didn't move. Neither did she. For a moment, the only sound was the rain and the soft hum of the lamp. Her eyes held mine, not mischievous anymore, but unreadable, searching. I wasn't sure if she was joking or testing me, but either way, something changed in that silence. The air grew heavier, charged. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Then she smiled again, small, knowing, and leaned back against the couch, breaking the moment like it never happened. "You're staring," she said, her tone playful again. I exhaled, forcing a laugh. "You started it." Her laughter joined mine, soft but unsteady. We talked for a while after that, pretending everything was normal, but nothing felt the same. Every glance lingered a second too long. Every pause carried meaning we didn't dare name. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Her hand rested briefly on my arm, light, steady, familiar. "Drive safe," she said quietly. Our eyes met one last time, and though her words had been teasing, her expression wasn't. It was gentle, maybe even sorry. As the door closed behind me, I knew something unspoken had begun, and neither of us could take it back. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, restless, heavy-headed, my thoughts still tangled around the night before. Her words echoed in my mind, looping quietly like a song I couldn't turn off. "I could teach you things girls your age don't even know." She'd said it like a tease, but the look in her eyes hadn't matched the tone. There had been warmth there, and something else, something deeper, harder to define. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just a moment that had gone too far. A slip of words, nothing more. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the memory, not the way her voice softened near the end, not the way silence fell right after. I didn't go back to her house that day. Or the next. Instead, I wandered the small streets of town, places that used to feel easy and familiar. Everything looked the same, the bakery on the corner, the park bench where we used to sit after school, yet it all felt distant now. Maybe because I wasn't that kid anymore, and she wasn't just someone's mom. That thought alone made my chest tighten. I found myself at the old riverbank by evening, watching the sun slip below the trees. The water caught the last of the light, rippling like it was trying to remember the color of fire. I sat there until the sky turned blue-gray, replaying everything, her laughter, her teasing, the way she'd looked at me afterward like she wished she could take it back. For the first time, I wasn't sure what I wanted from her, or what she wanted from me. That night, I stayed awake late, phone in hand, staring at her name in my contacts. I typed a message twice and deleted it both times. What would I even say? Thanks for dinner. Thanks for the confusion. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come easy. Every thought of her carried the scent of rain and jasmine, the soft cadence of her voice, the memory of her hand brushing mine. The next day, I heard from her indirectly, through her son. He called to ask if I was free that weekend. Mom said to invite you, he added casually. She thinks you're avoiding her. I laughed it off, but my throat felt tight. Avoiding her? Maybe. But not because I wanted to. By evening, I saw a small envelope slipped under my door. No name, just a folded note in familiar handwriting. You left your sweater here. Come by before you go. No tease this time. No playful tone. Just an invitation, quiet, careful, almost like an apology. I held that note for a long time. Part of me wanted to stay away, to let the space between us close itself. But another part, the part that remembered her smile and the honesty behind her eyes, knew I couldn't. Not yet. The note stayed on my table all night. I must have read it a dozen times, tracing the small curve of her handwriting, wondering what she felt when she wrote it. By morning, I already knew what I was going to do, even if I told myself I was only going to pick up the sweater. When I reached her house, the door was already half open. She must have heard the car pull in. Come in, she called softly. Her voice carried none of the teasing edge I was used to. Just calm. Maybe a little tired. Clara was in the garden, trimming the pale lavender shrubs along the path. The late afternoon light settled around her like gold dust, turning the air warm and soft. She looked up when I approached, the faintest smile touching her lips. I was starting to think you'd forgotten, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. I tried, I admitted. That made her pause, just long enough to let the words sink in. She nodded slowly, as if she understood more than I'd said. We sat together on the small wooden bench under the shade. For a while, we didn't speak. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of lavender and damp soil. Finally, she said quietly, I think I made you uncomfortable. Her voice trembled slightly, just enough for me to hear what she was hiding beneath her composure. I shook my head. No. Just, confused. She sighed. It wasn't fair of me. I forget sometimes that I'm not as invisible as I feel. That sentence stayed with me. Not as invisible as I feel. There was something raw in it, not regret, but honesty. I turned to her. You're not invisible, Clara. You never were. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady, glistening in the sunlight. Maybe. But it's easy to feel that way when everyone around you is building new beginnings and you're quietly standing in what's left of yours. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I could hear in her tone all the years she'd carried alone, the empty dinners, the quiet mornings, the waiting. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled softly into mine, warm and still. I didn't mean to cross a line, she said after a moment. That night, I just forgot the rules for a second. I shook my head again. Maybe we both did. She smiled then, faint but real. The kind of smile that feels like forgiveness. We sat there until the sky began to turn orange, our hands still joined. No more teasing, no pretending. Just quiet understanding. When I finally stood to leave, she stood too, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then she stepped closer, wrapping her arms around me. It wasn't a playful hug. It was steady, human, full of unspoken gratitude. Her cheek brushed against my shoulder, and in that stillness, I felt it, the peace that comes when two people finally tell the truth, even without words. The next morning came quiet and bright, the kind of morning that makes everything look softer than it really is. My bag was already packed, the car half loaded, but somehow I kept finding reasons not to leave just yet. The sweater she'd given back the night before still lay folded on the passenger seat. I stared at it for a moment, then sighed, stepped out, and walked back toward her house one last time. The garden gate creaked softly when I pushed it open. She was there, watering the plants, sunlight catching in her hair, sleeves rolled to her elbows. The sight felt so ordinary and yet, somehow, it stopped me in my tracks. She turned at the sound of my footsteps. "You're still here," she said, smiling faintly. "Not for long." She nodded, setting the watering can aside. For a moment, we just stood there, not in silence, but in a space full of everything we didn't have to explain. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," I said. Her smile wavered just a little. "Goodbyes are overrated." "Maybe," I said. "But sometimes they matter." She looked down, brushing a petal from her hand. "You'll do fine out there," she murmured. "You're kind. The world needs more of that." There was pride in her voice, and something else, something softer, that trembled around the edges. I stepped closer. "You taught me that, you know." She looked up, a question flickering in her eyes. "Patience," I said quietly. "How to listen. How to see someone for who they really are." Her expression changed, surprise first, then warmth. She smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't the teasing one I'd grown used to. It was real, tender, open. She reached out and touched my face lightly, her thumb tracing just under my jaw. Her hand lingered there, steady, like she was memorizing the shape of me. "Some lessons," she said softly, "stay with you forever." It was the same line she'd used before, back when everything between us was still unspoken. But now, it carried weight, a quiet understanding that whatever had begun between us wasn't meant to fade, only to change shape. I covered her hand with mine, pressing it gently against my cheek. "Then I'll remember this one." For a moment, neither of us moved. The morning breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faint scent of lavender. There was no tension, no ache, just peace. When she finally lowered her hand, she smiled again, though her eyes glistened. "Go on," she said softly. "Before I think of another excuse to keep you here." I laughed under my breath, nodded, and stepped back. At the gate, I turned once more. She was still there, standing by the flowers, sunlight wrapped around her like a secret the world didn't need to know. I waved. She didn't. She just smiled, small, knowing, complete. And as I drove away, I realized some people don't need promises or endings. Sometimes, love is just a moment, one that changes everything, even when it's over. If this story touched something in you, take a second to like the video, subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances, and share your favorite moment in the comments. I read every one, and your words mean more than you know.